Hi, and welcome to the Message for a Spouse video. Now, I'm assuming at this moment that actually this is not the spouse, this is the bar taker, and I know that you're curious about what this is. The analog to this message is message for me, which means it's the message for you as a bar taker. Um, the idea behind this lecture is that my wife Sarah and I, who've been running Celebration Bar Review for many, many years now, did this lecture the first time a number of years ago. And this is, I don't know how many iterations of that lecture, but it was Sarah's idea to do this. She had sort of graciously suffered through all the bar craziness and looked at it from the standpoint of not the bar taker. And she said, why don't you put together something for spouses of the bar takers? And I'm going to use the word spouse to mean anyone that's significant to you as a bar taker. And that's our purpose today. If you are in fact the bar taker, what I like you to do is let your most important family members, spouse, partners, significant others, parents, children, friends, co-workers, employers, whoever you're going to rely on during this process. I'd like you to let them watch this video. It's going to take about 45 minutes or so, and then you can pick up with your studies following that. As I said, the analog for you is that message for me, awkwardly titled, I realize. So what I'd like you to do is hand over your iPod or iTouch or whatever device you're using, or bring the individual to the computer screen and let them watch this discussion, and then we'll come back to you when we return to the substantive material and start your studies. So go ahead, I'll take a minute and wait. Oh, that was cruel, wasn't it? All right, fine, I know you're still there, but go get the person I want to be here, and I'm going to begin anyway. To the significant other, the spouse, the partner, the parent, the child, I'll call you the spouse for all of this lecture. I'm glad you're with us. My name is Jackson. And on this lecture, as the person who's really helping the bar taker, and that's what we're going to call the person that told you to watch this, this is my chance to talk with you a little bit about the process and what the bar exam is, what's going to be happening over the next few weeks or next few months, and offer some specific ways, I hope, in which you can help that individual to get through the course, to be successful on the exam, and hopefully to keep a good, solid relationship with them in the intervening time. Now, what I want to do is give you a little bit more information about the bar exam itself, about the bar review process. I'd like to give you a little bit of perspective about what's going to happen, perhaps a little bit of insight and occasional humor about the process that you and the bar taker are going to undertake together, and it is a joint venture. Now, to begin with, I'd like to talk about what the bar exam is, and for some of you this would be a review, and I apologize for that, but I found over the years that a lot of spouses really don't know quite what everyone's talking about, and they hear all the initials and it sort of goes by them. So let me just sort of tell you what's going on. As you probably know, or undoubtedly would know at this point, it's not enough just to go to law school in order to be able to practice law in most states in the U.S. Indeed, what you have to do is to pass a formal exam called the bar exam. And that formal exam can last anywhere from 1 day up to 3 days. It differs by jurisdiction. Now, unfortunately for most bar takers, but in fact very fortunately for my family, most states don't allow a member of the bar in one state to transfer their bar membership to another state. In other words, that's called reciprocity. It doesn't exist in a lot of places. So, for example, if someone is licensed in New York, they still have to take the bar exam if they want to practice law in Florida. So that means that regardless of whether your spouse is just coming out of school or is been practicing for a number of years, they're going to have to probably take a bar exam, and that's why they're involved in this course and what they're doing at that time. Now, the bar exam is one of the more difficult tests that people have to take. Like any formal licensing test, it is a high stakes, high stress kind of exam, and it is governed by a very strict process. The test itself is actually made up of a number of different kinds of questions, most of which are prepared by groups that call themselves variously the Board of Law Examiners or the Board of Bar Examiners or the National Conference of Bar Examiners. Now, in each state, these bar examiners report to the state's highest court, and they're under a fair amount of scrutiny, and they are charged with the task of making sure that new members of the bar are qualified to actually practice law. So it's a big job for them. And it's also a way of protecting the industry and the market and restraining the number of new attorneys. And so frankly, bar examiners are not falling over backwards to help your bar taker get into the bar. Now the test, I say all that, but I also have to tell you the test is actually pretty fair in spite of what you may hear. The bar examiners are doing a fair job, and by that I mean they're doing a balanced job. Now, if your family is a bit like mine, in our family, Sarah pays all the bills, always has, and so even though it's been many, many years, decades since I went to law school, she still remembers exactly how much money I spent and we spent on my law school education. And in her view, and by the way, she is totally phobic about cameras and talking to people, so you'll never see her. I promise she's there, but you just won't see her. In any event, if she were here, she would tell you that it was silly to spend tens of thousands of dollars back then. Now it's hundreds of thousands, but tens of thousands to go to law school. And then when I was done, I knew absolutely nothing about how to practice law. Indeed, that's the nature of law school versus the bar exam. The bar exam is a very specific test of specific principles and concepts. Sometimes we call that black letter law, but it's also a test of how one can write and argue and analyze under time conditions. Now, that's the bar exam, but law school, by comparison, or at least most law schools certainly today, tend to teach more theory or concept. If you went through the law school process with your spouse, you heard them talking about things like thinking like a lawyer or making lawyer-like analysis or a variety of other phrases that all sort of conveyed the same thought. But essentially, I think what law schools do is they take your money for 3 or 4 or more years, and then they pat you on the back and they hand you a document. If it's like mine, it's in Latin, so I'm not exactly sure what it says. And they pat you on the back and they say, "Attaboy, way to go, now go take a bar review so you can pass the bar exam." And that's where a course like ours comes into the picture. The bar review is really designed to help someone pass the bar exam. And while we try and take a more holistic view of the student, that's still our primary focus, and it's really what we do. We focus on what's going to be on the test that the bar taker is going to be going through. Now, because each test is a little different, you'll sometimes hear your bar taker speak about different components, and they tend to use initials for these things. The one that you're most likely to hear is an initial acronym called MBE. That stands for the Multi-State Bar Exam. This is a 200-question multiple choice test. It's given in a 6-hour time period over 1 day, and it covers 6 basic legal topics. The same test is given across the country on the same day. It's always given in the last Wednesday of February and then again on the last Wednesday of July, and so the bar exam revolves around that test date. Now, the multi-state exam is difficult. It's a hard, fine-line distinction type of test, and like any exam given under time conditions, it puts a fair amount of stress and strain on the bar taker to get the proper answer. The good news about the test, however, and this is important for you to know, is that the test only requires about a 60 to 65% correction to pass. In other words, a C minus D plus if you're thinking about in school terms. That's important for you to remember because there will be times potentially when the bar taker is acting like they have to get everything right and they have to be perfect, and that's not necessary. And you want to remind them that 60 to 65% is all they have to do. Now, another component of the test that you may hear the bar taker talk to you about would be the essay part of the exam. In some states, that's called the multi-state essay exam, or MEE. By and large, the states that we work in don't have that. They have state essays, but they all work essentially the same way. The essays typically require the bar takers to write answers that last anywhere from 30 minutes up to 1 hour in answer to a hypothetical fact pattern or problem. Typically, these essays cover state-specific law, but they can also cover more generic areas of law as well, the 6 multi-state subjects, for example. Now, in some states, the essay part of the test represents only a morning. In other states, it's a full day, and in some states, it's even 2 days worth of testing. And it's also quite stressful in its own way because unlike multiple choice, which is objective, this is subjective. There's no one correct answer. It therefore is a more inexact science, if you will, and it requires a different kind of practice and preparation to be ready. So that's a second part. Now, in some states, there's a third kind of question, state-specific multiple choice. These are usually very narrow, fairly limited in their scope, and generally not the most important part of the test, but something that has to be worked on. And then in some exams, there's a fourth kind of question called a performance test. Again, we have an acronym for that. If it's written by the National Conference of Bar Examiners and used in multiple jurisdictions, this is called a multi-state performance test, or an MPT. In other states like California, they draft their own performance tests. We don't call them the CPT, it's just the PT there, so there you go. In any event, a performance test is really designed to simulate the work of a real-life lawyer. Package of information is given to the applicant under time conditions, and they're asked to draft particular kinds of written work in response to that document. Does it actually simulate legal work? Probably not, but it's a different kind of test, and it's one of the things that's included in a number of exams. And I think it's all part of the overall package that the examiners go through to keep their tests relevant and accurate in terms of deciding who should or shouldn't be in the bar. Now, what our course will do is to work with your spouse from start to finish to prepare them for all the areas of the exam that come up. The way that we do that is really in a three-part approach. We ask your student to read, which means you're going to see a lot of our read books or our online version of the books, and you may get tired of seeing those around the house. And then they're going to listen to lectures on that same material, which means they're going to be walking around the house a lot with headphones on. I fully encourage you to take advantage of that time to make fun of them since they can't hear you. But they're going to be engrossed in that, I have no doubt, or they'll be sitting in front of the computer watching or listening as well. And then the third part of the course is the question practice. This is where they literally sit down and practice doing the type of question that we're talking about. That's probably when they're going to be most irritable about being interrupted. So if they tell you they're doing question practice, that's a good time to stay out of the way. Now, one of the clues you're going to have about what they're doing when is a document called the study guide. It's something we send to every student. It's got a list of all of the assignments, and it's something that you should take a look at just to be generalized or generally familiar with the approach that we take. It lays out each assignment, says how long it should take and the order to do it. And the purpose here is to give the student a structure. So it could be useful for you to periodically say how you doing relative to the study guide or what assignment number are you on. And if you've looked at that overall study guide, then you'll have some sense of how they're doing. Now, one of the things that obviously is most students who have to take the essay or performance test have to do is a lot of practice writing. As I said, that could be very stressful for them. But that may occasionally involve you in terms of helping to fax or send something to me to review if they're in that part of the course. They may occasionally turn to you if you're the computer guru in the house for assistance with how to get online or do the lectures or whatever that means. They may need you occasionally to find the book they've misplaced. Those sorts of things happen as well. My real point here is that whatever you can do to help them with those sorts of external tasks probably would be well appreciated and keep the stress level down for everybody. Now, having said all of that about sort of the externals and the broad outline, it's undoubtedly true that they've spent money for a course like ours. They've spent probably a fair amount of money to register for the bar exam, perhaps to handle their travel and hotel accommodations. Maybe they even have come to you and said, I've got to have a laptop to take the exam. And while I'm often accused of needing new toys in my house all the time, I will say on their behalf, that's actually a pretty legitimate expense. If they have the opportunity to type an exam, they probably ought to do it, and you shouldn't begrudge them the opportunity to do that if you can afford it. It's possible that in your house there's just extra money lying around. If so, I hope you'll adopt me. But more likely than not, your bar taker's efforts to take the exam are going to affect your budget in the short term, if not in the longer run as well. And that can be a cause of friction between family members, and it's something I think we need to talk about. I want to say to you something that the bar taker might want to say but shouldn't, and that is that bar membership is absolutely critical here for the spouse to get the employment opportunity that they want. Very few people take bar exams just for the sheer thrill of it. Most of the time it's because they need a job or they want a job or they're moving to someplace where they've got to get a job. And without that kind of job, while there are jobs available, for the most part, without a bar membership, you don't get paid anywhere near as much. So that's one of the ways that the spouse can help you pay off the bills. So it's important that they take the next test and that they do well on it. To fail the test means waiting 6 more months at least into the testing cycle, then waiting another couple months after that for results, then waiting for the character and fitness results to come in, then going through the employment process, and then ultimately getting a job. That's a lengthy process. So whether this is the bar taker's first time to take the exam, hopefully, or it's a multiple time, the next bar test is the one that they want to pass. And you should do everything you can to help them with that. In the long run, it's to everybody's best interest, I think, to make that happen. So I hope that gives you some sense of what might be going on and what's happening with the test itself. Well, what I want to do now is to change our focus for a few minutes and talk a little bit about what we've seen happen to some bar takers during the process. My goal here is to give you a preview of what you might expect so that you're not surprised if it happens. I'm not suggesting that it happens to everyone. Lots of people go through taking the bar and they do just fine and they never have a meltdown and they never raise a harsh word or even an eyebrow. Most of them are Vulcans. But for the most part, people have some stress with this and it affects them in small ways or sometimes big ways. And I want you to be aware of it because there may be some things you can do to minimize that, to help it, and certainly not to exacerbate it. I will say that it is not beyond the realm of possibility that you will experience a Jekyll and Hyde transformation in your bar taker between this point and a few days after the bar exam. I've seen it happen to students. I've experienced it myself. I certainly have seen it occur as I work with students, and it's really pretty remarkable. It's a transformation essentially from someone who starts at the beginning to be a nice, rational human being, and they turn into a crazy monster, and then after the exam, after they've had a couple of days to decompress, they come back to being that person they originally were. That itself is not so surprising, I suppose. What is surprising is that somehow it's like they take that drug Halcyon, they don't remember what happened. They literally don't remember that they went crazy. I've been told that it may be something like, menopausal women, but in any event, they don't know that it's happened. And then they wonder why you and the children and the pets are all cowering in the corner every time they walk in the room. They really and truly don't have any idea that they went through any change at all. And that's one of the incredibly maddening parts of this process. So I'm just telling you that right now. If it happens, just shake your head, say, dang, he told me that was going to be that way. They're not lying to you. They really don't remember that they went crazy. Now, if I were trying to describe the kinds of characteristics that can occur as people are going through this stress, I guess I'd have to lump them mostly into negative things. And we've tried to deal with that. There's a message called Message for Me that deals with trying to keep a healthy lifestyle and nutrition and exercise and balance in their life. I encourage prayer and meditation. All of those are designed to help reduce the stress of the exam. But when there is this stress, one of the things that happens is that we can see it manifest itself in a number of negative ways, and that's what I want you to be aware of. You can see problems around eating or sleeping or drinking. If they smoke, they're going to smoke more. If they drink, they may drink more. If they're having trouble with sleeping, they're going to be more of an insomniac. Now, while we'll do what we can on our end to encourage healthy living and lifestyle habits, we're going to need your help because the more that you're aware of these stress-inducing possibilities, the more you can help to intervene and cut it off, or at least make the bar taker aware of what they're doing. Let me say, obviously, this is a stressful time in most people's lives. It's a stressful time in your life as the spouse. I mean, there's no question about that. But no one likes to be tested. No one likes to be grilled or put under the fire of a test. And no matter how well the student did in law school or how well they did in practice of law or in their business life, it's a reality that this test is going to grind down on them, and the stress level will go up. Now, for some people, you'll never know that their stress level went up. Some of them just eat it up, they swallow it, they deal with it. Other people, it manifests very quickly and it manifests very obviously. One of the ways it manifests is that you'll hear the student tell you that they just don't have enough time to do things. And I want to debunk that myth right now. Most of the students in our course for now practically 20 years has studied while they worked, part-time or full-time. They've studied while they took care of their family, alone or with the help of others. They study while they did community work and other things going on. In other words, their lives continued. And the bar is simply an additional amount of work that has to be done every single day or nearly every day. And that can lead to stress, but it is not in and of itself a requirement that they drop out of living. Now, how does that stress get played out when someone feels like they don't have enough time? Well, in addition to things like eating or sleeping or drinking or smoking, it plays out in interpersonal relationships, and that's where you want to be certainly aware. You may find that the bar taker becomes much more irritable, shorter with you, more easily irritated by any interruption during their study time. Frankly, they're going to become childlike. They'll become potentially very self-centered. Let me be clear about this. I don't condone that behavior. I don't accept it, and neither should you. There is plenty of time I am telling you, and you can tell them, there is plenty of time to do the work that they have to do and study for the bar. Stress is natural, but it's not inevitable. And it's certainly not desirable beyond pretty basic levels. And in fact, it even causes people like me to have their throats cleared. Now, having said all that, and hopefully you're still with me, you don't need to feel like the student is entitled to behave badly during the process. That's not their entitlement. And when they overstep their bounds, the world and life is going to go on in spite of their exam. So when they overstep their bounds, you have the right to call that behavior out. You have the right to give them some perspective in a kind, loving, gentle way. Although sometimes that kind, loving, gentle way is, hey, turkey, get your act together and come out here and empty the trash. I think that you'll see, as the student goes along further in the study process, the possibility of occasional moments of frustration. Now, that frustration is typically manifested in externalities. In other words, it's focused outward. It's really internal frustration, but it gets played out. And so it can manifest itself in anger towards other people or circumstances, road rage, frankly, or 7-Eleven rage, whatever it might be. Sometimes, in more serious cases, it'll manifest as depression, some degree of despair, and may require professional counseling or help. One of the ways you'll probably see it manifested, if it's going to be there, is the bar taker will exhibit anger at me as a mentor. And I've got plenty of voodoo dolls that have been sent to me by people, some with the pins still in them. My job is to get your bar taker ready for the test. I am notorious for being blunt and direct. I do that because I don't have time to pussyfoot around. I mean, I pretty much have to get to the point. And that means sometimes saying something to your loved one that they don't really want to hear. When that happens, when in a conference I have to say to a student, grow up or get together, or you're doing a really poor job, and I'm cleaning up my language probably somewhat from what I actually say to them, it's a little bit like being a football coach. I yell at them, and they don't like that, understandably. And it's not uncommon for them to get off the phone or to look at their email and then rant and rave for a while about how miserable I am and how awful I am and how much money they spend and why don't I understand all that. I'm telling you that right now, that it can happen. It's okay. I'll live through it, trust me. And by the time we're done, most of these bar takers and I are usually on good terms. Actually, some of them are actually my friends. But you should know that it's simply part of the process that can happen. Don't internalize it. Don't take it to heart. Don't worry about, gee, they're so mad at their mentor, they aren't going to be able to study. I'll get them where they need to go, trust me. But it also manifests in anger at the people around them, and that can mean you or the kids or the parents or the employers or co-workers. You may see the bar taker become increasingly angry at a boss or an employer or you over really trivial, foolish sorts of things. Now again, I want to be clear, I don't condone any of that, nor should you. But you should be aware that it can happen. And if it does, I want you to be the more rational person, the adult as it were. When those events start to come up, what you want to do is say to the bar taker, wait a minute, let's take a breath here, let's back up a minute. I want to just tell you that Jackson said this would happen, that this is predictable, and that we need to talk about it. And you want to talk about it before it expands and enlarges and becomes something that's too big to handle on your own. You also need to let the bar taker know that some behaviors just simply won't be tolerated. They need to work those things out and keep going. Remember that most of this is frustration that's internal and it's just simply being exposed or expressed outwardly. What the bar taker is going through is a difficult process, learning new skills, and certainly with high stakes at risk. And inevitably in learning, there are going to be failures and missteps. There's stepping back, trying things again and again, and that can cause frustration. So be aware that that may be what's going on. Now, sometimes that frustration is over really trivial things that happen in a bar review course, or things that happen at work, or things that happen at home, whatever it might be. When those moments come up, try and keep perspective for yourself and your spouse. We'll do everything we can on our end to satisfy them around those sorts of trivial, matters. Computer goes down or an iPod breaks or something. We're going to tell them it's not the end of the world. I'd appreciate it if you would reinforce that message. There is nothing in our course that is absolutely critical by itself. In other words, there's no page of a book, there's no part of a lecture, there's no answer to a specific question that's critical to their passing or failing the exam, no matter what they tell you about that. Everything looks really big to a bar taker if it affects their study in any way. In fact, if I were really trying to characterize what a bar taker might do in terms of their worldview, I would say that the closer they get to taking the exam, they become increasingly infantile in that regard. They become self-centered, and it's literally in their mind a very clear point that no one else understands the enormity of what they're going through. No one else understands what pressure they're under, and why in the world doesn't everyone simply stop and acknowledge this incredibly difficult task that they have to go through with a high degree of difficulty? And really, why won't everyone let them just study? Well, you can imagine how much fun these people are to live with, and I give you great credit for embarking on the process. I do wear protective clothing when I go out in public, and I know that there are going to be bar takers around. I'll give you a lot of credit right now for starting in the process. I'll give you more credit when we're done. But I want to assure you right now that when this is all over, the bar taker you love will return to you. They will go back to being the person they were before. But for a while, they will be quite childlike, potentially, and it's part of what can happen. Now, I'll do as much as I can to puncture the self-righteousness balloons and the self-important balloons. I tease, I kid, I badger, sometimes I even confront. And that can make them angrier. But my function is really pretty much to keep them on task. And you can do a lot to help me with that process. Remember that I'm only talking or communicating with the bar taker a few times a week, perhaps once every few weeks, whatever it might be, but you see them and talk to them repeatedly. And anything that you can do that will give them perspective, that will remind them that the world continues, current events continue, your family's life continues, everything goes on around them, the world does not stop while they take their bar exam, is particularly important to remind them, no matter how obvious it seems to you. Well, that's certainly an encouraging and uplifting message so far, isn't it? I suppose you're probably thinking right now, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? Am I even going to know this person as they go through the study process? And the truth is that there are going to be moments when you may be really angry at them because of their behavior. When that happens, remember that it's a temporary condition for them and for you. It's an aberration, and it's going to go away. I really don't know very many students that go through any of these things and retain them or memorize them or keep them. A few students will internalize it, and they'll become quiet and withdrawn rather than venting outwardly. But I can tell you that those reactions are fairly typical. This behavior is fairly uniform, and it will surface in most people occasionally. So, what that leaves us with, I suppose, the more productive question: what can you do as a spouse to work with and support your student during the process? Well, there are some very specific things that I would encourage you to do. The first I've already mentioned, and that's to keep perspective. You be the perspective maintainer in your household. Remind the bar taker that the world is going on. There are other important things happening in their family and their jobs and elsewhere, and keep them engaged in that process as much as you can. Now, I don't mean you want to distract them from their studies, but I do say it's perfectly all right to go to the movies, to have date night, to talk about the kids' work at school. It's okay to go out to dinner. It's all right to do tasks around the house. It's all right to do the job that you're assigned at work. It's all right to help with the move. Whatever's going on, it's important that you keep them in that loop. It's particularly critical that you do this if you are the reason that this person's taking the bar exam. For example, one of my editors is a great editor because she's taken so many bar exams because her husband keeps moving to it or getting transferred to new jobs in new states. He's learned that when he's the one causing her to have to take the bar exam, he better shut up and do what she tells him to do so that he keeps the friction low. And by the way, she turned into a great editor for me because she got to do all that. But the point is that if you're the one who's causing them to take the bar, you're going to be the objectified reason for their unhappiness from time to time. And so it's important to remind them about why you're making the move. Hey, we really wanted to live in Florida where the sun shines, or, we've got this great opportunity in California, or whatever it might be. And I think it's important that you help keep that perspective as well. The second thing you can do, critically, is just to listen. You remember perhaps if you were with your spouse when they went to law school, that first year of law school. You remember they talked ad nauseum about the law. I mean, it was all they could talk about. Over time, thank God, it decreased a bit. But when they get back into the bar process, they tend to revert to that. They talk a lot again about all the things that they're doing, not with the same enthusiasm, I would say, but they're going to want to talk, and they should. They need to vent. They need to reach out. Because our course is a home study program, typically the bar takers are not working with other students directly, and therefore they do need to talk and vent and exploring things. And it's important, and you can be a useful sounding board for them, even if you don't know anything about the law. I mean, you now know a lot more about the bar exam. Just listening and asking questions, the kinds of logical questions that would come into your mind. Ask, listen, let them explain, let them talk through the process that they're going through. It's very helpful to them. There is a tendency for a bar taker in this situation to feel pretty isolated. You can remove and reduce that level of isolation dramatically just by being accessible to listen and to ask questions. Well, what else can you do? If your bar taker is going to be writing essays for the bar exam, one of the best things you can do, and one of the things I want you to do, is actually read the work that they're producing. Now, I don't mean all of it and all the time. And I know what you're thinking. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a bar reader. Or even worse, I am a lawyer and I'm not a bar reader. And that's fine. One of the things that I'm going to ask the bar takers to do occasionally in the course is give a piece of writing to a spouse or a coworker or someone else and ask that person to describe what they see in the writing back to the bar taker. That's a perfectly normal, natural thing to do. It's useful for the bar taker for reasons that I'll explain to them in the course, and they'll come to understand that more as we go along. But it can be very helpful to them if you'll just give them a sense of what they're writing and what you see. For example, is the writing legible if it's handwritten? Are they using actual conventions of English grammar? Things like periods and headings and outline headings and question marks and paragraphing and so on. You can look to make sure that words aren't missing and that the writing makes sense just from a communication standpoint. All of those types of things will be very helpful to me, and they'll be helpful to the bar takers they're working through the course. I also think it's a positive way to keep you involved in the process, and for that reason alone, it's useful. Now, occasionally the bar taker may ask your help with logistics, things like sending a fax or working out an email or working on the computer, just getting the internet connection up, typing up notes, working with them to organize, or as I say, where did I leave that book or iPod, whatever it might be. Those are great things that if you can do them to help. It involves you in the process in a way that's supportive and helpful. It's valuable to their well-being and their emotional stability. So that's a simple thing you can do if possible. Now, remember I said first, keep perspective. Second, I ask that you listen and ask questions. Third, that you read their work and be helpful about the external logistics. The fourth thing I think you can do that's helpful is to try and create an environment of stability for the bar taker, particularly as we get closer to the exam. It is an inevitability that things can and do go wrong the closer you get to a high-stakes test. In order to sort of prove that point, I want to read part of an email that I got from the spouse of a bar taker. I actually got it while that person was in the California bar exam. And the spouse, actually on the day of the exam, wrote me a note. And I just want to read you a part of it. It actually is a very lengthy note. But I want to read to you what this spouse had to say, and it's all true. Quote, "Thanks for mentoring spouse through one of the more harrowing experiences of his life. He's probably a better man for going through the course, but this week has been one of the worst of our lives also. The water pump went out on my car the day before he left, and there was no time to fix it. He left his study questions behind when he went to the airport, and getting them to him before the plane took off took at least a year off my life. Monday night, the refrigerator door fell off. Tuesday, there was a student protest at our high school, and I was the spokesperson for the school when 3 TV news crews arrived. Wednesday, our carpool system failed us, and the kids had to take the public bus system to go to school. Today, the computer system running the school shut down, leaving us with a block starting and 300 students with no idea what classes they were assigned to." Here's the important part. My spouse doesn't know any of this because I figured he didn't need to share my stress. Do you think? Here's the amazing part. This is an extraordinary person, and they certainly deserved a Medal of Valor for a week like that. Their student passed the exam. Those are the kinds of things that can and do happen. And appropriately, I think what this spouse did was to try and shoulder that stress during the exam time itself. And while I hope that none of you have quite such a bad week, there may be moments when problems come up in life, and you're going to be faced with a question: do I share or not share it with my bar taker? I think the answer is that as you know that individual, those things that they would be unhappy if they did not know about, you need to share with them, even if it's right before the test. But I think in sharing problems with them, you also have to have some sense of how you want to resolve it, either by working together to do something, or you doing something to resolve it, or delaying it until after the exam. Just holding on till after the test is useful. Inevitably, though, I would say you're probably going to end up carrying the brunt of things that have to happen in your family or outside the bar process, particularly the closer we get to the exam. And I think it's useful to know that up front and just prepare yourself for that, and know that if it does happen, it's a temporary, not a permanent phenomenon. I can tell you that if you really hate your spouse, this is the time that you can make their lives incredibly miserable. I have unfortunately had students with spouses leave them on the bar day. They've left the note on the bed saying, "I'm taking the children and divorcing you." That somewhat is a distractor for performance. It's a time when if you really want to get at them, you could, because the stress on relationships is enormous during this time period. That's why I'm doing this lecture really at its core. There are moments in this process where you may wonder why you ever bothered to get involved with this person or bring them into the world. I can say that safely as the parent of a bar taker. There are times when it just makes you nuts. And then there, as I described at the beginning, the phenomenon when they come back from the exam, they've had a day or two to decompress, they go back to being their normal selves and they've completely forgotten what went on before the exam or what they were like, and they're befuddled when you look at them, afraid to bring up things because they literally can't imagine why you'd be hesitating. I literally cannot describe that phenomenon any better than that. I'll just tell you that it happens repeatedly. Keep your sense of humor about it. Tell me about it when it happens. I love to hear those stories. They're amazing. But I do think that before the exam, it would be helpful if you can take over some of the day-to-day kinds of tasks that might be disruptive to the student. It'll help your relationship with them. And I don't want you to do that as a martyr, but as being a supporter. And you know, there's some people for whom doing those day-to-day tasks might be very helpful because it keeps them grounded, it gives them perspective. And I do believe that bar takers should never be relieved of their responsibility to walk the dog or to go to their children's school events or to wash the dishes or take the trash out or to attend to emergencies in the family. Those things strike me as reasonable things to expect of them. But to the extent that you can help that person near the end of their studies with childcare of small children or doing major projects around the house, by all means do it. Do the banking if you can. It'll make everyone's life easier. In the long run, you'll probably save yourself a fair amount of aggravation. Let me also make this suggestion. I've found over the years that spouses really feel isolated in this as well. And if you find yourself in that situation, I don't want you to hesitate. Please feel free to either email me. My email is jackson@celebrationbarreview.com, and your bar taker's got that. Or to call me toll free, 1-800-840-6929. And again, your bar taker's got that information. And it's all in that study guide book as well. I'll take your calls. I'll respond to your emails. I will say sometimes it's helpful if you tell me which student you're talking about. I've gotten some emails where I don't know who they're talking about, and it's a little tough. And I'll be more than happy to communicate with you about what might be going on. And often, as a spouse, you have a perspective on what's going on in the student's life that I certainly can't get at. And so it's helpful for me to get the insight that you've got as to what they're going through or feeling, particularly if you think that they're coming to injure me. I'm just kidding, really. I think that whatever you can do to reassure them that they're making progress, that they're growing, they're going to be successful, that's really important. By the same token, when they start talking negatively, when they start talking about how hard it is and how they expect to fail, and they may not use those words, but that's clearly the intent of what they're saying, call out the behavior. There's no room to expect failure. It's not an option. It's not necessary. It shouldn't happen. And if you let them go through that process, it's what I describe as sitting on the pity pot. Oh, poor me, no one understands. I'm going to fail because my mentor sucks and, the world is unfair and the bar examiners hate me and blah, 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 blah. You need to literally get in their face, or whatever the appropriate response in your family is, and say that's not acceptable behavior around here. You are not entitled to feel sorry for yourself. You're not entitled to feel put upon or beleaguered. You're not entitled to feel abused. This is a voluntary process. You chose to go to law school. You chose to take a bar exam, and I expect you to be successful. They need to hear that from you. It's critically important. Remember, they have been successful in the past. That's how they got into law school. That's how they got out of law school. That's how they got to the point of taking a bar exam. And they should expect to pass this exam as they would expect to be successful in other things they've done in their life. This is the time to keep them away from the family members that always have the story of their failures in life. The mother or father that's always reminding them of the time when they were, prepubescent and they did some stupid thing. You want to avoid those moments for them if you can. You want to get them focused on good things, not bad things. It is productive to focus on being successful. It is not productive to focus on bad things. And frankly, they're going to become a giant pain in the butt to live with when they behave like that, and you don't need to put up with it. Sometimes a direct statement that says you're a pain in the butt, or more appropriate, snaps people out of it. So don't be afraid of them. Don't treat them like they're made of porcelain. you can be direct with a bar taker during this process. Trust me, I've made a career out of doing it. I think they sometimes need to hear it from family members. Well, those are my thoughts and ideas as you start out on the process. Undoubtedly, you'll discover some things that work well in your relationship, and when you do, I'd love to hear about them and be able to share them with others. You know, this lecture is really the cumulative result of spouses, family members, friends, telling me over a long period of time, I wish I'd had some idea going into the process of what to expect, and here's what I did that worked, and here's what didn't work so well. And I'd love to share that with others as you go through. I want to remind you that you are a partner in the process, and I want to illustrate that with the final story. When I first went to law school, Sarah accompanied me on a very long trip in a very old car to meet the financial aid officer at Georgetown Law. We needed the financial aid. It was a big deal, and we drove from Denver to D.C. without stopping, and just to have a 1-hour meeting with this financial aid officer face to face. And when we got there, the financial aid officer, who ultimately became a pretty good friend of mine, said, it's pretty weird. I mean, you and your wife coming, driving all the way here, and you're just having a 1-hour meeting and turning around and driving back because we both had to get back to work. That's a pretty crazy thing. And looked at Sarah and said, why did you agree to do this, to come along? And Sarah said, well, I feel like I'm going to law school in effect as well. I want to be part of the process from the beginning. And she has been part of the process from that first day all the way through our business today. That partnership has been an integral part of what we do, and it's served us well and our students well. That kind of partnership is productive and helpful. And in the same way, I think your partnership with your bar taker can be productive and helpful as they go through the bar process. And I want you to feel very much a part of what this person is going through, and that you feel like you can be their light, their perspective, their assistant, but also their guide in the things that you can help them with. I personally want to thank you for doing that. I appreciate all that you're going through and will go through. But I want to give you my final comment that when your student passes the bar, they owe you big time. And you should feel free to remind them of that. And when they pass the bar and they have the opportunity to go on and do some wonderful things, you should take equal pride in that accomplishment, even though you did not take the test. Now, I realize it's frustrating to be in the position where you can't do anything about the outcome directly, but your work before the exam with them is very helpful, and it does make you very much a partner in the process, and I want you to enjoy the success just as much as the student will when they've earned that success. Thanks for your partnership and your participation. Sarah and I look forward to working with you and your spouse in our bar review program. This concludes our lecture. Good luck to you, enjoy, and I look forward to hearing from you with your successes. Thanks.